welcome back to the Sleepy Couch. Tonight we are going somewhere vast and dry and utterly unforgiving. A place where the sky is so big and so empty that a man can disappear into it, or become something monstrous under its gaze. We are going to talk about Breaking Bad, a show that took a 50-year-old chemistry teacher in his underwear, standing in the New Mexico desert with a gun in his hand and a gas mask on his face, and turned him slowly, irreversibly, over 62 episodes into one of the most terrifying figures in the history of American storytelling. This is not a show about drugs. Not really. It is a show about what happens when an invisible man decides he would rather be dangerous than forgotten. It is about pride. The quiet, corrosive, all-consuming kind of pride that does not announce itself, but instead sits inside a person for decades, waiting for permission to emerge. It is about the lies we tell ourselves while becoming someone unrecognizable. About the distance between who we are and who we believe we deserve to be. Breaking Bad premiered on January the 20th, 2008. It ran for 5 seasons and 62 episodes. It won 16 Primetime Emmy Awards. It received the Guinness World Record for the highest-rated television series of all time. It changed what people believed television could do, what television could be, and what a single character's transformation could mean for an audience of millions watching in the dark. And tonight, we are going to take it apart, layer by layer. From the joke that started it all to the final image of a man lying on the floor of a meth lab smiling. So settle in. Let the day leave you. Let the desert come. This is the Sleepy Couch. And tonight we are the ones who knock, gently, because you are trying to sleep. The show nobody wanted. Every great story begins with a conversation that almost did not happen. Breaking Bad is no different. The whole concept began as a joke. Vince Gilligan and fellow writer Thomas Schnauz, both unemployed after the X-Files ended, were sitting around with nothing to do when they joked about buying a recreational vehicle and driving around the country cooking methamphetamine. It was a throwaway line, the kind of dark humor that unemployed people in precarious industries use to make themselves feel less afraid. But Gilligan could not let it go. Something about the image, an ordinary man, an RV, a vast and lawless desert, stayed with him. Before the meth angle even crystallized, Gilligan wanted to do something that had never been done on television. Write a story in which the protagonist becomes the antagonist. He was tired of what he called the self-imposed stasis of TV characters, sitcom dads who stayed the same for decades, detectives who solved cases without ever being changed by them. He wanted a character who moved, who deteriorated, who became, by the end, someone the audience would have been terrified of at the beginning. He described the journey he had in mind with a single phrase. Mr. Chips to Scarface. Mr. Chips being the gentle, beloved teacher from the 1930s novel. Scarface being, well, Scarface. The distance between those two reference points is the entire emotional geography of Breaking Bad. The title itself is older than Mr. Chips. The phrase Breaking Bad dates back to at least 1919. Originally meaning something closer to going bad in the sense of failure. Over time, it became a Southern colloquialism meaning raising hell. Gilligan, who grew up in Virginia, picked the title thinking it was more widely known than it really was. Many critics and executives who first encountered it had to ask what it meant. The show was rejected by nearly every network in American television. Showtime passed because they already had Weeds, a show about a suburban mother selling marijuana, and the premise felt too similar. HBO passed, TNT passed. FX went as far as discussing a pilot but turned it down because they already had 3 male-centric crime dramas on their schedule. They chose a show called Dirt instead. By the time Gilligan secured a meeting with AMC, he had essentially given up. He did not even know which project his agent was referring to when the meeting was arranged. He thought of AMC as, in his own words, that channel where they play Short Circuit 2 10 times a day. At that time, AMC had 0 original programming. Mad Men was still just an idea. The Walking Dead was years away. AMC was a channel for old movies. And Gilligan was a man with a show nobody wanted. AMC said yes. They said yes because they had nothing to lose, and because the script was extraordinary. It took them another year to buy the rights from FX before production could begin. The channel that played Short Circuit 2 on a loop decided to take a chance on a show about a dying chemistry teacher who cooks methamphetamine in the desert. Gilligan has said more than once that if he had known about the show weeds before he developed Breaking Bad, he would never have created it. The show that would become the highest-rated scripted television series in history exists because its creator had a gap in his television knowledge. Had that gap been filled, the door would have closed before it ever opened. Breaking Bad was originally set in Riverside, California. The production moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico to take advantage of a tax rebate for television production. That financial decision became a creative windfall. The vast, sun-bleached landscape of New Mexico, the mesas, the silence, the merciless light, became as much a character in the show as Walter White himself. You cannot imagine Breaking Bad anywhere else. But it almost was. The desert was an accident. The greatest visual element of the show was chosen by an accountant. The entire series is 3,030 minutes long across 62 episodes. The number 62 is significant. On the periodic table, the 62nd element is samarium, a chemical used in the treatment of pain in cancer patients. A show about a man dying of cancer told in exactly as many episodes as the atomic number of the element that treats cancer pain. Whether this was intentional remains characteristically unclear. Gilligan has neither confirmed nor denied it, which is exactly the kind of answer you would expect from the man who created the most carefully constructed show in television history. Only 9 writers contributed to the entire series, an extraordinarily small team for a drama of this scale. Most prestige dramas employed twice that number. The intimacy of that writer's room meant every voice was heard, every idea considered at a single table. The consistency of tone that defines Breaking Bad, the way it never wavers, never loses control of its own register, is partly the product of having so few hands on the material. Gilligan did extensive research before writing a word of the pilot. He read memoirs by recovering drug addicts. He and his writers took a former drug dealer out to lunch to learn the rhythms of the business, the hierarchies, the language, the specific ways in which money moves through a distribution network, and the specific ways in which people get caught. The dealer apparently enjoyed the lunch. He also apparently enjoyed the show when it eventually aired, though his exact comments have not been made public. The show was written with a level of chemical accuracy that most television dramas would never bother with. Gilligan wanted Walter White's genius to feel real. Not Hollywood real, but textbook real. Every equation written on a whiteboard in the background was checked by a consultant. Every lab procedure was researched against academic sources. The writers consulted published papers and spoke to working chemists. The goal was never to create a how-to guide for manufacturing methamphetamine. It was to create a character whose intelligence was believable enough that his transformation from high school teacher to drug kingpin felt earned rather than convenient. Walter White had to be genuinely brilliant. If he was not, the entire show collapsed. Before Breaking Bad, Gilligan had written and produced multiple episodes of The X-Files at Fox. That connection would prove crucial in ways he could not have predicted. The X-Files featured early performances by Bryan Cranston, Dean Norris, and Aaron Paul, all three of whom would later star in Breaking Bad. The show that made Gilligan's career also introduced him, without anyone knowing it at the time, to the actors who would make his masterpiece possible. There is a version of the story in which Gilligan never works on The X-Files, never meets Cranston, never writes the episode Drive, and never has the footage to show AMC executives when the movie stars turn him down. In that version, Breaking Bad does not exist. The thread connecting all of it is almost impossibly thin. Gilligan has described his approach to storytelling as putting Walt up a tree, throwing rocks at him, and then seeing how he gets down. The metaphor is simple, but accurate. The show was about problem solving, a chemist applying the scientific method to the chaos of criminal life. Hypothesis, experiment, result, adjustment. Every moment of brilliance, every narrow escape, every devastating failure was the consequence of something that had happened before. The show never relied on coincidence. It never asked the audience to accept that something happened because the plot required it. Everything was earned. Casting destiny. The casting of Breaking Bad is one of those stories that makes you believe in creative destiny. The idea that certain actors are meant to inhabit certain roles, and the only question is whether the universe will arrange itself in time. Bryan Cranston was not AMC's first choice for Walter White. He was not their second. The network wanted a movie star, someone whose name alone would draw an audience. John Cusack was approached. He turned it down. Matthew Broderick was approached. He also turned it down. AMC was looking for star power. What they would eventually get was something far more valuable. At the time, Cranston was best known as Hal, the bumbling, lovable father on Malcolm in the Middle. AMC's executives were not sure if the guy from a family comedy could carry a drama about a man who becomes a murderer. But Gilligan remembered something the executives had not seen. He and Cranston had worked together on an X-Files episode called Drive, in which Cranston played a terminally ill white supremacist who takes Fox Mulder hostage. The performance was raw, desperate, and completely unlike anything Cranston had been known for. Gilligan showed the episode to AMC. They watched a comedian play a man consumed by rage and dying pride. They were convinced immediately. Walter White was originally written as a 40-year-old man. The writers later aged the character to 50, deciding that a midlife crisis at 50 carried a different weight. A sense of doors already closed, a life already lived in the wrong direction. Gilligan left much of Walter White's backstory deliberately blank in the scripts. Cranston filled in the gaps himself, writing detailed biographical notes about the character's childhood, education, marriage, and the specific circumstances under which he left gray matter technologies. The Walter White on screen is a collaboration so thorough that it is impossible to say where the writer ends and the actor begins. Working with costume designer Kathleen DeToro, Cranston chose Walter's wardrobe. Neutral greens and browns, earth tones deliberately bland, designed to make Walter look as unremarkable as a man could look. A man you would walk past without seeing. A man whose students would forget by the end of the semester. The visual dullness was the point. It made the transformation that followed all the more shocking. Cranston also worked with makeup artist Frida Valenzuela to craft Walter's mustache. That thin, slightly defeated strip of facial hair that became the visual marker of a man slowly losing his camouflage. When the mustache goes, Heisenberg arrives. The pork pie hat, the shaved head, the goatee, these were not just costume changes. They were a man shedding his old skin, revealing something underneath that had been waiting his entire life to be seen. The Heisenberg hat was not originally planned. Cranston's bald head was getting sunburned during outdoor filming in the New Mexico desert. He needed shade, Someone found a pork pie hat. Cranston put it on, looked in a mirror, and the most iconic silhouette in modern television was born. By accident, by the sun, and by a practical need to avoid skin damage. Aaron Paul, who would become Jesse Pinkman, the show's moral compass, its emotional center, its most heartbreaking figure, has never taken a single acting class. When asked about his approach during a Reddit session, he said simply, "I always just thought, hey, pretend like you're being someone else, and that's all there is to it." Jesse Pinkman was supposed to die at the end of the first season. Gilligan had written his exit. The character was conceived as disposable, a gateway into the criminal world who would introduce Walter White to the infrastructure he needed, and who would then be eliminated. The 2007 Writers Guild of America strike shortened the first season from 9 episodes to 7, compressing the timeline. Killing Jesse in 7 episodes felt premature. There was not enough story around his death to give it weight. And Aaron Paul's performance, the vulnerability he brought to a character written as a burnout, a loser, a figure of dark comedy, made the writers pause. They saw something in Paul's Jesse that they had not written. They saw a human being. Jesse lived, and in living, he gave the show its conscience. Without Jesse, Breaking Bad is a show about a monster. With Jesse, it is a show about a monster and the person the monster destroys. Every season after that was a reprieve that no one had planned for. It is the most consequential creative decision in the history of the show. Dean Norris, who played Hank Schrader, Walt's DEA brother-in-law, thought when he first read the script that he was auditioning for a comedy. This led him to portray Hank with a louder, broader energy than the writers intended. The result was a character more complex than planned, a man using bluster to cover something fragile. The depth of Hank emerged from a misunderstanding that became a gift. Jonathan Banks was originally given a much smaller role as Mike Ehrmantraut. He was expanded into a major character when another actor became unavailable. Banks's audition was so compelling that the casting notes read simply, "Does it get any better? So good." Mike Ehrmantraut, the character who would deliver some of the show's most devastating monologues, who would die by a river at the hands of a man he had never respected, exists because of a scheduling conflict that opened a door. Bob Odenkirk as Saul Goodman. The character's name is a pun. It's all good, man. The role was conceived as a joke in the writer's room, a sleazy lawyer who would appear for a few episodes and then vanish. Odenkirk made the character so vivid, so specifically human beneath the cheap suits and the billboard advertising, that the writers kept expanding his presence. A joke in a writer's room became Better Call Saul, a 6-season masterwork. Giancarlo Esposito modeled Gustavo Fring on corporate CEOs, men whose violence was expressed not through rage, but through the absolute enforcement of standards. Gus smiles when he fires someone. He adjusts his tie before committing murder. Esposito played him with a stillness that made every scene feel like it was about to detonate. And then there is Bogdan, Walter's car wash boss, the man with the magnificent eyebrows, played by Marius Stan. Stan has a PhD in chemistry in real life. Breaking Bad was his first acting role. He decided to try acting in his 40s. The man who humiliates Walter White on screen is, in reality, the kind of person Walter White might have become if his pride had been a little smaller. The genius in the details. Breaking Bad was not simply a well-told story. It was a show in which every color, every camera angle, every episode title carried meaning. The depth of its visual language was unprecedented, and it rewarded the kind of obsessive attention that its audience was more than willing to provide. Color symbolism runs through Breaking Bad like a hidden grammar, a second language that operates beneath the dialogue, telling the audience what the characters cannot say. Walter White's wardrobe changes across 5 seasons trace his moral collapse with the precision of a color chart. In the pilot, he wears beiges and soft greens, the colors of a man resigned to invisibility, a man who has spent so long being unnoticed that his clothes have learned to match the walls. As Heisenberg emerges, the palette shifts, darker greens, then blacks. By the final season, Walter dresses almost entirely in darkness. The costume designer confirmed that each season's wardrobe was mapped against Walter's psychological state, so that a viewer watching the series a second time, knowing the ending, would perceive the transformation from the very first frame. The clothes tell the story before the dialogue does. The symbolism extends to every character. Marie Schrader wears purple in almost every scene, a color the show associates with denial and detachment from reality. She surrounds herself with purple while her husband hunts a drug lord who is sitting at their dinner table. Hank wears orange, signaling danger and proximity to violence, the color of a man who is always closer to death than he realizes. Jesse wears red when he is emotionally exposed, when his defenses are down. Skylar wears blue, the color of the meth itself, the color of the product that is destroying her family. Walt delivers his most famous threat, "I am the one who knocks," while wearing a red shirt. Red, in the show's palette, means immediate danger. The costume tells you what the dialogue confirms. The episode titles hide secret messages. The first, 4th, 10th, and 13th episodes of Season 2 all begin with black and white teaser sequences. Take the titles of those 4 episodes and place them side by side. 737, down, over, ABQ. A Boeing 737, crashing, over Albuquerque. The show hid the ending of its second season inside the titles of its episodes, scattered across months of broadcasting. Most viewers never noticed until someone pointed it out. Then they could not unsee it. The final episode is titled Felina. It is an anagram of finale. But split it into 3 parts, Fe, Li, Ne, and you get the chemical symbols for iron, lithium, and sodium. In other words, blood, meth, and tears. 6 letters containing the entire emotional chemistry of the show. In a scene Vince Gilligan called a 1 in a million shot, Bryan Cranston threw a pizza onto the roof of Walter White's house on the very first take. The scene was supposed to require multiple attempts. The pizza, a large flat disc, sailed upward in a flat arc, hit the edge of the roof, and slid to a stop in exactly the right position. The crew erupted. The take was used, and the pizza was never sliced. The fictional chain Venezia's advertises that they pass the savings on to you by not slicing. Even in pizza, the world building was obsessive. The blue crystal methamphetamine seen throughout the series is rock candy. The props department created batches of blue-tinted candy that actors could handle and bag safely. Cast members who tasted it said it was quite good. But the show's depiction was so persuasive that real drug dealers began adding blue dye to their methamphetamine to brand their product as the Heisenberg stuff. Law enforcement reported seizures of blue-tinted meth in multiple states. A fictional show had altered the marketing strategies of actual criminals. A DEA chemist, a real one employed by the federal government, taught Bryan Cranston how to cook methamphetamine so the scenes would look authentic. The DEA confirmed the blue meth on screen was approximately 96% accurate in color, texture, and crystalline structure. They then used the show in their own training programs. The agency that fights drugs used a show about making drugs to train the people who fight drugs. The irony is perfect. The coordinates of the spot where Walter buries his money are not fictional. They are the actual GPS coordinates of Q Studios in Albuquerque, where Breaking Bad was filmed. The show embedded its own physical location into its narrative. The place where Walter's money is hidden is the place where Walter's story was created. In the pilot, Walter White's pants fly off into the desert during his panicked escape in the RV. They land in the sand and disappear from the story. Or so you think. In season 5, years later, as Walter pushes a barrel of money through that same desert, he walks past a pair of filthy, ancient pants lying in the dirt. His pants. Still there. The show remembered everything. It remembered other things too. The pink teddy bear that falls from the sky in the season 2 cold opens, landing in Walter's swimming pool, missing half its face, foreshadows the death of Gustavo Fring 2 full seasons later. Gus dies with half his face blown off. The bear showed you how before you knew who. 2 actors from the original Scarface, Stephen Bauer and Mark Margolis, appear in Breaking Bad as drug kingpins. Bauer played Tony Montana's right-hand man in Scarface. In Breaking Bad, he plays Don Eladio. Margolis played Sosa's enforcer. In Breaking Bad, he plays Hector Salamanca. And in one episode, Walter watches Scarface with his family, a fictional character watching the film that his creator used as the template for his own story. The moment is recursive, self-aware, and slightly dizzying. A story looking at its own reflection. Walter White's house is a real house. It has been the home of a woman named Frances since 1973. After the rooftop pizza scene became iconic, fans began throwing pizzas onto her actual roof. She has asked them to stop. They have not entirely stopped. She does not mind the hundreds of cars that slow down in front of her house every month. She does mind the pizzas. What it cost them. Great performances are not free. They cost something. Physically, emotionally, and sometimes in ways the actors did not anticipate. The people who made Breaking Bad gave pieces of themselves to the work, and not all of those pieces came back. During a fight scene between Jesse and Tuco Salamanca in the 2nd season, Aaron Paul was knocked unconscious. The choreography went wrong. Paul suffered a concussion and required medical attention. He returned to set the following day. The take in which he was genuinely hurt is in the finished episode. Paul prepared for Jesse by spending hours with real addicts and former addicts in recovery programs. He sat with them. He listened. He asked questions most people would not think to ask. Not about the drugs, but about the daily texture of addiction. What does it feel like to wake up and know that the first thing you will do is betray yourself? What happens to your relationship with time? What do you lose first? And what is the last thing to go? He has said the experience changed how he understood people permanently. It gave Jesse a truthfulness that no amount of technique could have provided. Bryan Cranston shaved his head for the role and kept it shaved throughout the series. He lost weight and gained it back as Walter's health fluctuated. He wore contact lenses to subtly change his eye color. He worked with makeup artist Frida Valenzuela to craft Walter's mustache, that thin, slightly defeated strip of facial hair that became the visual marker of a man slowly losing his camouflage. When the mustache goes, Heisenberg arrives. The pork pie hat, the shaved head, the goatee. These were not just costume changes. They were a man shedding his old skin. On the last day of shooting, Cranston stripped down and walked around the set completely nude. A callback to the pilot, where Walter stands in the desert in his underwear. Aaron Paul, when asked about the situation, said, "Anytime he can have the opportunity to show me his ass, he does." The moment was both a farewell and a liberation. A man stepping out of a character he had inhabited for 6 years by taking off everything. When filming the episode where Walter kills Mike Ehrmantraut, the scene by the river where Walter shoots a man who was simply trying to leave, trying to disappear, trying to do the one thing Walter White has never been capable of doing, which is to walk away. The entire crew wore black armbands. Jonathan Banks' final day on set was treated as a genuine loss. The armbands were not scripted. They were not a production decision. The crew chose to wear them spontaneously because the departure of Mike from the story felt like the death of someone they knew. The scene itself is one of the most understated deaths in the series. Mike does not scream. He does not beg. He sits by the river and watches the water and says, "Shut the fuck up and let me die in peace." It is the most dignified exit in the show. A man choosing silence over spectacle, choosing the river over the noise. The prosthetic effects team from The Walking Dead was recruited to create Gustavo Fring's destroyed face in the season 4 finale. They built a detailed model of Giancarlo Esposito's head, sculpted from life-cast molds, with one half intact and the other destroyed down to the skull. The model was then digitally blended with Esposito's real face in post-production, a process that took months. The result, Gus walking out of the room after the explosion, one half of his face immaculate, the other a ruin of exposed bone and tissue, calmly adjusting his tie before collapsing, became one of the most iconic images in television history. And the pink teddy bear from the season 2 cold opens, missing half its face, had already shown you this image 2 years before it happened. The show hid the death of its greatest villain inside a burned children's toy, floating in a swimming pool. Walter White's underwear sold at auction for almost $10,000. Hector Salamanca's bell went for $19,000. A signed copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, the book that leads Hank to discover Walter's secret, sold for $65,500. The total auction generated nearly $1 million. The objects of a fictional life, purchased by people who needed to hold something real from a story that had meant something to them. Gilligan deliberately cast people with comedic backgrounds. He said, "If you can do comedy, first of all, you have to be able to act. And if you're an actor at heart and also a comedian, you can do drama." Cranston came from the Malcolm in the Middle, Odenkirk from sketch comedy, Bill Burr, Lavelle Crawford, all comedians. Funny people understand timing, and timing is the architecture of both comedy and tragedy. Each episode except the pilot had 8 days of shooting. The pilot had 14, extended to 15 because Gilligan contracted the flu. The economy of the schedule meant every moment was precious. There was no time for indecision, no room for multiple exploratory takes. The pressure forced a state of focused intensity visible in the finished product. A show that never wastes a scene, never lingers without purpose, never includes a moment that does not advance either the plot or the understanding of a character. The show's approach to violence was deliberate and disciplined. Gilligan had a rule. Every death had to mean something. There would be no casual killing, no disposable bodies, no violence for the sake of spectacle. Each death, no matter how minor the character, was treated as a consequence, a link in a chain stretching all the way back to Walter White's decision in the pilot. The show wanted you to feel the weight of each one, and you did. Even the deaths of characters whose names you never learned carried a gravity that most shows could not achieve even with their lead characters. While filming a scene featuring Wendy the prostitute, production was interrupted by someone who thought the actress was a real sex worker and tried to solicit her services. The line between the show's fiction and its real-world setting was, at times, uncomfortably thin. Albuquerque's actual streets, actual motels, and actual landscape gave the show an authenticity that occasionally caused confusion between the world being depicted and the world being lived in. The show was fiction, but it was fiction that looked, sounded, and smelled like reality. That was always the point, and sometimes the point cut both ways. Beyond the screen, Breaking Bad did not stay inside the television. It leaked out into tourism, into law enforcement, into the language people use to describe moral compromise. The show changed things that shows are not supposed to change. The move to Albuquerque created an entire tourism industry. Local businesses produced Breaking Bad themed merchandise. Blue meth candy sold in small plastic bags. Blue meth donuts at local bakeries. Locally brewed Heisenberg dark beer. Custom Heisenberg Pez dispensers. And even guided bus tours of filming locations. The show turned a mid-sized southwestern city into a pilgrimage site for fans who wanted to stand where Walter White had stood, to see the car wash, to visit the desert where empires were built and dismantled. The real restaurant where the Los Pollos Hermanos scenes were filmed is called Twister's, a fast food chain in Albuquerque. The show's art department painted the Los Pollos Hermanos logo inside the building for filming. Gilligan said, "I believe it stayed up there for months on end. For all I know, it might still be there." It is indeed still in place. Twister's is now one of the most visited tourist attractions in New Mexico, a fast food restaurant that people fly across the country to eat at. Not because of the food, but because a fictional drug lord once stood behind its counter and smiled at customers while running a methamphetamine empire. The Sage Neuroscience Center in Albuquerque used Breaking Bad as a tool to help people get off drugs. New Mexico has one of the highest rates of addiction in the United States. By sharing the show's stories of destruction and consequence, the center created what they called Breaking Addiction Scholarships. 12 weeks of free rehabilitation treatment. A show about manufacturing the most addictive substance in the American drug landscape became, in the city where it was filmed, a vehicle for helping real people escape that substance. DEA agents have confirmed that Breaking Bad was discussed within the agency not as entertainment, but as cultural documentation. The show's accuracy in depicting distribution networks, money laundering, and organizational structures was close enough to reality to function as unintentional public education. The agency that fights drugs used a show about making drugs to train the people who fight drugs. After watching the season 5 episode Ozymandias, George R.R. Martin called Walter White a bigger monster than anyone in Game of Thrones, and vowed publicly to do something about that in his next book. One showrunner challenging another, through the press, to match the moral darkness of a rival show. Whether Martin ever picked up that gauntlet depends on a book that, as of this recording, has not been published. Bryan Cranston and Aaron Paul got matching Breaking Bad tattoos after the series wrapped. Paul's reads, "No Half Measures," the title of a season 3 episode and a reference to a pivotal conversation between Walter and Mike about the consequences of leaving things unfinished. The scene in which Mike tells Walter the story about a time he chose mercy over decisiveness and someone died because of it is one of the show's most devastating moments. Paul chose those words because they defined for him what the show was about: the impossibility of doing terrible things halfway. Cranston got a smaller tattoo, a tiny rendition of the show's logo. The tattoos are permanent, the characters are fictional, the marks are not. Nearly 2 decades before becoming Walter White, Bryan Cranston appeared in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the children's action show in which teenagers in colorful costumes fight rubber-suited monsters. The distance between Power Rangers and Heisenberg should not be traversable in a single career. The fact that Cranston traversed it says something about the range of his talent and the unpredictability of a life spent performing. You cannot know when you are voicing a villain in a children's show that you are 20 years away from changing what acting on television looks like. The Metastasis remake, the Colombian telenovela version of Breaking Bad, compressed all 62 episodes into 3 months. Walter White became Walter Blanco. Jesse became Jose. The original sits at 9.5 on IMDb. The remake sits at 2.5. The comparison proves that it was never the plot that made Breaking Bad great. It was the patience. Better Call Saul began as a joke in the Breaking Bad writer's room. Someone said we should make a Saul Goodman spin-off, and everyone laughed. Then they stopped laughing. Then they made it. The name Saul Goodman is itself a pun. It's all good, man. A lie built from a reassurance. The show ran for 6 seasons and 63 episodes. 1 episode more than Breaking Bad itself. When Saul panics about leaving town in the Breaking Bad episode Granite State, he says, "Best case scenario, I'm managing a Cinnabon in Omaha." Better Call Saul opens with a scene of him doing exactly that. Working at a Cinnabon in Omaha in black and white under a false name. A joke became a prophecy. The Mythbusters program tested the mercury fulminate explosion from season 1 and determined it would not produce the exact results shown. The explosion would be smaller, the damage different, but they also built a replica of the machine gun mechanism from the finale, and that one worked. The show's science existed on the border between accuracy and dramatic license, close enough to reality to be tested by a television program dedicated to testing things, and far enough from reality to be spectacular when it needed to be. That balance, the sense that what you were watching could almost happen, that the chemistry was almost right, that the physics were almost plausible, was a large part of what made Breaking Bad feel different from every other crime drama on television. It was not realistic, but it was rigorous. And rigor in storytelling is its own kind of honesty. At its peak, Breaking Bad generated approximately $1 billion per year in revenue for Warner Brothers. A show that started on a channel nobody watched became one of the most valuable properties in the entertainment industry. The Salve Walter White website, SaveWalterWhite.com, is real and still accessible on the internet. The fictional fundraising page built by Walter Jr. to pay for his father's cancer treatment actually exists. You can visit it right now. The fictional and the real share a URL. The boundaries between them have always been thinner than we like to believe. We are roughly halfway through our journey now. Halfway through the facts, the secrets, the hidden details that make Breaking Bad what it is. If you are still awake, good. There is more to come. If you are drifting, that is good too. The stories will be here. They do not need you to be awake to reach you. They will settle into the quiet places behind your thoughts. And when you wake, some of them will still be there waiting. Take a breath. Settle deeper. The desert is still here. The chemistry is still working. Jesse, the heart that survived. We need to talk about Jesse Pinkman. He is, in many ways, the true heart of Breaking Bad. Not its brain, that belongs to Walter. Not its ambition, that belongs to Heisenberg. But its heart, the part of the show that feels, that bleeds, that cannot stop caring. He was supposed to die in the first season. We have already said this, but it deserves more space, because the story of Jesse's survival, his reprieve from a death sentence written into the show's original DNA, is one of the most consequential creative decisions in modern television. Without Jesse, Breaking Bad is a character study. With Jesse, it is a tragedy. The difference between the two is the difference between watching a man destroy himself and watching a man destroy someone else. Someone younger, someone more vulnerable, someone who trusted him. Jesse only refers to Walter White by his first name, Walter or Walt, twice in the entire 62-episode series. Every other time, across 5 seasons, across every betrayal and every desperate alliance, he calls him Mr. White. Think about that. The formality reveals the power dynamic that defines their relationship, a dynamic that never shifts, no matter how much Jesse suffers. Jesse never entirely stopped seeing Walter as his teacher, the man who stood at the front of a classroom and explained the periodic table while Jesse sat at the back and did not listen. 2 words, Mr. White, carry the entire weight of their tragedy. They are the words of a student who cannot graduate, no matter how much he has learned. Walt Jr., Walter's actual son, is the only major character in the series that Jesse never meets. Across all 62 episodes, they never share a scene. Jesse is the son Walter chose. Walt Jr. is the son Walter abandoned. The two never meet because meeting would make the substitution explicit, and the show preferred to let the audience feel it rather than state it. R.J. Mitty, who plays Walt Jr., does have cerebral palsy in real life, but not as severely as his character. He actually had to learn how to walk with crutches for the show, a reversal of the usual dynamic in which a non-disabled actor learns to portray disability. Mitta portrayed a more severe version of his own experience. In the Season 2 episode 4 Days Out, Jesse jokes to Walter, desperate, dehydrated, stranded in the desert, about building a robot to save them. In the series finale, Walter White builds exactly that, a remote-controlled machine gun mounted in the trunk of his car. Jesse's throwaway joke in Season 2 became the mechanism of the show's climax. Breaking Bad remembered every line. Jane's death, the moment Walter watches Jesse's girlfriend choke in her sleep and chooses not to intervene, was foreshadowed repeatedly across multiple episodes. The writers seeded visual and dialogue cues so that a second viewing reveals the inevitability of what at first appears shocking. And the plane crash that follows, in which Jane's air traffic controller father, consumed by grief, makes a fatal error, is based on a real event. The 1986 Cerritos mid-air collision, in a detail that feels too precise to be coincidence, the real junior air traffic controller guiding one of the planes was also named Walter White. El Camino, the sequel film following Jesse's escape from captivity, was filmed in near total secrecy. Aaron Paul gained and then lost weight to match the physical state of a man who had been imprisoned and starved for months. The film arrived on Netflix as a surprise, an epilogue that fans had hoped for but had not been promised. The final image of El Camino is Jesse Pinkman's story ends not with a bang, not with a speech, but with a man driving in silence through darkness toward a place he has never been. It is, in the end, the opposite of Walter White's ending. Walter dies in the place where he was most himself. Jesse leaves to find out who he is without Mr. White. Both endings are perfect. Both are devastating. And both were earned across 5 seasons of the most patient, most meticulous character development in the history of television drama. Vince Gilligan was contacted during the final season by the parents of a 16-year-old boy named Kevin Cordasco. Kevin was terminally ill with cancer and one of the show's biggest fans. There was something about Walter White, his father explained, the way he took control of his illness, that resonated with Kevin. Gilligan and the cast visited Kevin at his home and in the hospital. During one visit, Gilligan asked what Kevin felt was missing from the show. Kevin thought about it carefully. He was 16 years old and dying, and he was being asked by the creator of his favorite show what the story should do next. He said, "I want to know more about Gretchen and Elliot. I want to know more about Walt's backstory with them." That conversation is how Walter's former gray matter partners ended up with a pivotal role in the final season. A dying teenager told the showrunner what was missing. The showrunner listened, not out of pity, but because the note was right. Gilligan offered to tell Kevin how the show would end. Kevin declined. He said he would rather find out along with the rest of the world. He wanted the same experience as every other viewer. He did not want to be treated differently because he was dying. He wanted to be treated like a fan. Kevin Cordasco died soon after. The 9th episode of the final season, Blood Money, is dedicated to him. His name appears on screen at the end in white letters against black. Most viewers do not know who he was, but the people who made the show know. And they made sure his name would be there in the show he loved for as long as the show exists. The hidden architecture. Breaking Bad reveals its architecture only on the second or third viewing. The first time you watch it, you follow the story. You are caught in the momentum of Walter White's descent, propelled forward by the need to know what happens next. The second time, you see the scaffolding, the structures beneath the surface that hold everything in place, the patterns that were always there, but that you could not see because you were too busy watching the man fall. Walter White absorbs the traits of the people he kills. This is never stated in the show. No character ever mentions it. No dialogue acknowledges it. But it is there, consistently, across the entire series, visible to anyone who watches closely enough. After Crazy 8 dies, the first person Walter murders, in a basement with a bicycle lock, in a scene so quiet and so terrible that it sets the moral tone for everything that follows. Walter begins cutting the crusts off his sandwiches. Crazy 8 ate his sandwiches without crusts. It is a tiny detail, a gesture so small that it registers, if it registers at all, as an unconscious habit. But it is the first instance of a pattern that will continue for 5 seasons. After Mike Ehrmantraut dies, Walter begins ordering his drinks on the rocks, the way Mike always did. He adopts Mike's phrases. He speaks in Mike's cadence, that clipped, no-nonsense rhythm. After Gustavo Fring's death, Walter becomes colder, more calculating, more disciplined. He becomes less reactive and more deliberate. He starts to move through rooms the way Gus moved, with a stillness that suggests not calm, but the suppression of something enormous. Each killing deposits a residue in Walter's behavior. He becomes a composite of the people he has eliminated, a mosaic of the dead, walking around in the body of the living. It is one of the subtlest and most disturbing details in the show, and it was never explained because explaining it would have ruined it. The audience was meant to feel it without understanding why. And they did. The show's relationship with scientific accuracy was careful, but not absolute. In the first season, Walter dissolves a body in hydrofluoric acid, which eats through the bathtub and the floor beneath it, sending a cascade of dissolved material crashing through the ceiling of the room below. The Mythbusters tested this and demonstrated that no amount of hydrofluoric acid could actually eat through a bathtub in the way depicted. The acid is corrosive, but not to porcelain or ceramic at the speed shown. Gilligan has acknowledged this. The scene remains in the show because it works dramatically, because the image of a body dissolving through a floor is so viscerally horrifying that the chemistry becomes secondary to the storytelling. Sometimes the show chose drama over accuracy. When it did, it chose well. The color green appears in the background of scenes where money is discussed or pursued. Walter's car wash apron, the money itself, a green duffel bag, a green sweater. The color functions as an unconscious marker, training your brain to associate certain tones with greed without making the connection explicit. The Fly episode, Season 3, Episode 10, titled simply Fly, is the most divisive episode in the entire series. Walter and Jesse spend the entire runtime trying to kill a single fly that has contaminated their laboratory. Nothing else happens. No other characters appear. The plot does not advance. The Fly is the entire episode. It was written as a budget-saving measure, a bottle episode using only 2 actors and 1 set. But within that constraint, the writers created something that functions as either a masterpiece or a disaster, depending entirely on what you want from television. For some fans, Fly is the show at its most profound. an existential meditation on control, guilt, contamination, and the impossibility of perfection. The fly is the thing Walter cannot fix, the mistake he cannot undo. For other fans, it is 47 minutes of two men chasing a bug. There is no middle ground. Your answer to the Fly episode reveals what you want from stories, whether you want things to happen or whether you want to sit inside a feeling and let it teach you something. Tuco Salamanca was originally intended to be the main antagonist throughout Season 2. Raymond Cruz, the actor, was offered a regular role on The Closer and could no longer commit. His departure forced Gilligan to rethink the entire second season. The void left by Tuco led to the creation of Gustavo Fring, a character who would not have existed if Cruz had not taken another job. The show's greatest villain was born from a scheduling conflict. When Gilligan needed a mechanism for the Tuco confrontation, he remembered the Henry Fonda film Meister Roberts, in which a character uses mercury fulminate as an explosive. Gilligan discovered that mercury fulminate resembled crystal methamphetamine. With that visual coincidence, one of Heisenberg's most formative moments was created. Chemistry as a weapon. The show's visual language treats the desert as a moral space. The wide, unpopulated landscapes function like the ocean in a Hemingway novel, a vast, indifferent witness to human choices. The desert does not judge Walter White. It does not punish him. It simply holds space for what he is becoming. Those long, slow aerial shots of the mesa were not decoration. They were theology. The desert was the silence into which Walter's sins disappeared. And the silence never answered. A total of 270 people died throughout Breaking Bad, including the plane crash. 270 lives across 5 seasons, in a show about a man who started by wanting to leave his family enough money to survive without him. Each death connects, through a chain of cause and effect, to the choice Walter White made in the pilot, the choice to cook methamphetamine instead of accepting the money offered by his former business partners. Every death flows from Walter's pride. The Mythbusters program tested the magnet scene, in which Walter and Jesse use a giant electromagnet to destroy evidence inside a police station, and found the concept scientifically plausible. The show's science existed on the border between accuracy and dramatic license, close enough to reality to be tested, and far enough from reality to be spectacular. And there are the theories. There is a fan theory that Breaking Bad is a prequel to The Walking Dead. Daryl finds a bag of bright blue meth in Merle's stash. Glenn's red Dodge Challenger looks like the one Walt bought for his son. A song from Breaking Bad plays in Fear the Walking Dead. The connections are too numerous to be entirely accidental. Someone on the Walking Dead team was paying attention, and there is the other theory, the one that changes everything if you let it in. That the entire final episode is Walter White's dying dream. That he never made it out of the New Hampshire cabin. That he died alone, coughing blood, and everything in the finale is a fantasy constructed by a brain shutting down. The revenge is too clean. The outcome's too perfect. The car starts at the exact right moment. The keys fall from the visor as if by magic. The machine gun mechanism works flawlessly. Vince Gilligan has never confirmed or denied the theory. He has smiled when asked. The smile is neither a yes nor a no. It is a showrunner's smile, the expression of a man who knows that ambiguity in the right hands is more powerful than certainty. It's how it ended. Unlike most dramas which lose viewers over time, Breaking Bad gained audience across its entire run. Through most of the series, viewership held at 1.5 million. Impressive for cable, but not extraordinary. The first half of Season 5 jumped by 1 million. The final run broke 5 million consistently. The finale drew 10.28 million viewers, 6 times the season 1 average. The worse Walter White beat Dean Norris was offered a role on a comedy sitcom during the first half of season 5. He suggested to Gilligan that killing Hank within the first 8 episodes would free him to take the other job. Gilligan politely declined. Hank would die on the showrunner's schedule, not the actor's. The character, whose death would become one of the most wrenching moments in the series, nearly ended prematurely because the actor wanted to do a sitcom. In the final episode, as Walter drives back to New Mexico from his hiding place in New Hampshire, he listens to El Paso by Marty Robbins, a song about a man who returns to the town where he is a wanted fugitive to find the woman he loves, a woman named Felina. The song is the roadmap for the episode. Walter's final journey mirrors its narrative almost exactly. The camera lingers on a New Hampshire license plate. The state motto reads, "Live free or die." It is also the title of the Season 5 premiere. The phrase applies to both of the show's central figures, Walter, who dies free on his own terms, and Jesse, who escapes captivity and drives into the night, free for the first time since the pilot. Ozymandias, Season 5, Episode 14, is widely considered one of the greatest single episodes of television ever produced. It is named after the Shelley poem about a fallen king whose empire has crumbled to dust, leaving nothing but a broken statue in an empty desert with an inscription that reads, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Bryan Cranston recorded a reading of the poem for the show's promotional campaign. His voice, measured, deliberate, freighted with the knowledge of what the poem means for his character, reading those words over footage of the empty New Mexico desert, is one of the most effective pieces of television marketing ever created. The campaign won a Cannes Lion Award. But awards are not the point. The point is that a Romantic-era poem about the futility of human ambition, written in 1818, became the thesis statement of a 21st century television drama about a man who cooked methamphetamine in the desert. The distances that great storytelling can travel, across centuries, across forms, across the gap between poetry and crime drama. The episode itself contains the death of Hank Schrader, the moment in which Walter White's worlds finally and irreversibly collide. Walt begs for Hank's life. Hank, who knows he is about to die, looks at his brother-in-law and says, "You're the smartest guy I ever met, and you're too stupid to see. He made up his mind 10 minutes ago." The line is devastating because it is true, and because it reveals in a single sentence the asymmetry that has defined their relationship for 5 seasons. Walter has always been smarter, but Hank, at the very last scene filmed for Breaking Bad, was not the last scene of the final episode. It was a flashback. Walter and Jesse in the RV, in the desert, cooking meth for the first time, used in the opening of Ozymandias. The last thing the cast filmed together was a return to the beginning. 2 men in a mobile home in the desert, one of them doomed, the other saved, neither of them knowing which one was which. There is a moment in the finale that most people miss. When Walter visits Skylar for the last time, he stands behind a structural pillar in her kitchen. From Skylar's perspective, the pillar divides Walter's face in 2, one half visible, one half hidden in shadow. It is the visual summation of the entire show. 1 man, 2 identities, Walter White and Heisenberg, standing in the same body, separated by a pillar, saying goodbye. The shot was composed deliberately. It lasts only a few seconds. Most viewers do not consciously notice it, but it is there. And once you see it, you understand that nothing in Breaking Bad was accidental. The show was always about the gap between the story Walter told himself and the truth. He said he was doing it for his family. He was doing it for himself. He said he was a good man in impossible circumstances. He was a proud man who had been given permission by cancer to become the person he had always wanted to be. "I did it for me," he says to Skylar in the final episode, standing in her kitchen in the half-light, knowing he will never see her again. "I liked it, I was good at it, and I was really alive." It is the first completely honest thing Walter White has said in 5 seasons. The first statement containing no rationalization, no self-justification, no performance for an audience of one. He did not cook methamphetamine to save his family. He cooked it because it was the first time in his life that he felt like himself. The tragedy of Walter White is not that he became a monster, it is that the monster was the truest version of him, and the mild, unassuming, invisible man everyone knew. Before was the disguise. The show's final image is a high overhead shot, the camera pulling away from Walter's body on the floor of the meth lab, his hand resting on one of the steel tanks. The police closing in from every direction. He is smiling, not a triumphant smile, a small, private, almost peaceful smile. The expression of a man who has arrived at last at the one place where he always belonged. The laboratory, the chemistry, the one space in which he was never invisible. He dies in the place where he was most himself. The camera rises, the lab gets smaller, the desert gets larger, and then there is nothing. What it left behind. Breaking Bad collected 16 Primetime Emmy Awards. Bryan Cranston won 4 for Outstanding Lead Actor, tying the record. Aaron Paul won 3 for Supporting Actor. Anna Gunn won 2 for Supporting Actress. The show won Outstanding Drama Series in both 2013 and 2014. The numbers are impressive. They are also somehow beside the point. Better Call Saul, the prequel, ran for 6 seasons and 63 episodes. 1 episode more than the show it was born from. It began as a joke and ended as a meditation on identity, regret, and the slow erosion of a good man's principles. The story of how a person who wanted to do the right thing became, through 1,000 small compromises, someone who could no longer remember what the right thing was. Where Breaking Bad was loud, Saul was quiet. Where Breaking Bad moved fast, Saul moved slowly. Where Breaking Bad showed you a man becoming a monster, Saul showed you a man becoming someone who would eventually enable a monster. Many critics call it the superior work. The debate may never be resolved. The 2 shows exist in conversation with each other like 2 halves of a single enormous story about the distance between who we are and who we choose to become. Breaking Bad was, in a very real sense, the last show that an entire culture watched together. It arrived after The Sopranos had proven that television could be literature, after The Wire had proven it could be sociology, but before the streaming revolution fragmented audiences so completely that no single show could command universal attention. It occupied a window, a brief, unrepeatable window, in which a cable drama could still be the thing everyone was talking about on Monday morning. That window has since closed. There will never be another Breaking Bad in this specific sense. Not because the quality cannot be matched, but because the conditions that made it a shared experience no longer exist. The show's influence on the television that followed it is difficult to overstate. The anti-hero drama, the genre that Breaking Bad perfected, became the dominant form of prestige television in the years after its finale. Shows like Ozark, Narcos, Better Call Saul, and dozens of others exist in the creative space that Breaking Bad opened. The show did not invent the anti-hero. The Sopranos did that. But Breaking Bad demonstrated that an anti-hero could go all the way, could become genuinely monstrous, genuinely irredeemable, and that audiences would follow. Not in spite of the darkness, but because of it. There is something in us that needs to see how far a person can fall. Breaking Bad went further than anyone thought possible, and we watched every step. Walter White's journey begins in chemistry and ends in chemistry. He starts the show teaching the periodic table to uninterested teenagers in a high school classroom. He ends it dying on the floor of a meth lab surrounded by the equipment that made him powerful and then destroyed everything he loved. The symmetry is deliberate. Chemistry is his first language and his last. It is the one constant in a life that changes beyond all recognition. The periodic table does not care who you are. It does not care what you have done. It simply describes the way things are. Walter White loved that about it. He loved that the chemistry could not lie. The show ran for 62 episodes. Samarium, Element 62, used to treat pain in cancer patients. A show about a man with cancer told in exactly as many episodes as the atomic number of the element that could have eased his suffering. Whether it was intentional or not, the number holds. The chemistry holds. It always held. And that is Breaking Bad. A show about a man in his underwear in the desert who became the most dangerous person in every room he entered. A show about chemistry, the chemistry of drugs, the chemistry of relationships, the chemistry of transformation. A show that started on a channel nobody watched and ended as the highest-rated scripted series in the history of recorded television. A show that began with a joke between two unemployed writers sitting around with nothing to do, imagining what would happen if they bought an RV and drove into the desert. They never bought the RV, but they built something in that desert that will stand for as long as people tell stories about what happens when ordinary men are given extraordinary permission to become themselves. The periodic table has 118 elements. Each one has a name, a number, a weight, and a set of properties that determine how it interacts with every other element in existence. Hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, all the way to oganescent, the last one, number 118, which exists for only milliseconds before decaying into something else. Walter White understood this. He understood that everything, every substance, every relationship, every empire is, at the atomic level, a temporary arrangement of particles that will eventually come apart. The meth was temporary. The money was temporary. The power was temporary. The only thing that was permanent was the knowledge, the chemistry itself. You are, perhaps, falling asleep right now. And that is good. That is exactly right. Because the desert is quiet at night. The chemistry is done. The reaction is complete. The elements have settled into their final configuration, and there is nothing left to do but rest. The New Mexico sky is enormous. If you have never been there, if you have never stood in the desert at night and looked up, it is difficult to describe what it feels like. The stars are not distant. They are close. They press down on you. They make you feel very small and very temporary and very much alive. That is the sky that Walter White lived under, the sky that watched him change, the sky that was there, unchanged, at the end. Sleep well. We will be here when you need us, every night, every time, whenever the world is too loud and you need someone to talk you down into the quiet. This is the Sleepy Couch. Good night.